Hi, this is Daniel, and you're watching Unrivaled Investing. This is a no hype financial channel where we are mission focused on finding you exceptional companies and unrivaled investments. Today, we are talking about JFROG. The ticker is FROG. Here's a little quick teaser. Why did it get my interest? First of all, it's a new IPO. It has hyper growth, growing over 50%. Their customer metrics, which we'll get to in a minute, they are off the charts. I'm talking about the top 1% in terms of companies out there. They're incredibly capital efficient. They didn't need to raise any money to get to this multi-billion-dollar valuation. They did anyways, but they didn't need to. That's how good this company is. This company has the setup that you see with lots of buy and hold companies over time. You know, the types of companies that it's buy it and forget it. You know, you might see a company like Motley Fool say, hey, go buy this stock. This is that type of company where it gets people really excited because it's a really strong company, has really strong financials, really strong growth prospects. So I see enough here to warrant a deeper dive, and that's why I'm making this video. So the goal of this video is, one, to understand what is JFROG. Once again, the ticker is FROG, F-R-O-G. What's their business model? What's their opportunity? Does this have 10x potential? Do they have an unrivaled value proposition? Because that's the key, filter that I use across all investments, all companies, because if you're unrivaled, it means you have the right to win. Lastly, the summary thoughts and the calculator, that I'm going to save for Journey subscribers, because the reality is, here it is, I'm giving you the whole ice cream sundae, but the cherry on top is for me and the Journey subscribers. But before digging in, what do I mean by Journey subscribers? I mean, you go to unrivaledinvesting.com, click on Journey to see my personal financial journey, what I'm buying, what I'm selling, what I'm holding each month. I'm also creating exclusive content. And the reality is, all it takes is finding potential one multi-bagger that could potentially change your life journey. So if you're interested in trying to find these multi-baggers, that's my personal mission here. So you can follow my personal mission, my personal journey to find these by going to unrivaledinvesting.com. Also, if you like learning about multi-baggers, make sure you subscribe to this channel. And if you're already a subscriber, I really appreciate the like on the video. Also, this video, I made it for the Journey subscribers that called it out, saying, hey, Daniel, can you please look at this company? They voted on it. I'm making it happen. And similarly, and in the comments below, if there are any companies that you want me to look at, leave a note saying, hey, this company's growing real fast. I think it has this unrivaled value proposition. Here's why. And I will add it to the long, ever-growing list. But we're going to knock these companies out. So what is FROG? So first, what's the deal with the weird name like JFROG? So in the founder's letter, they talk about how a frog is an agile animal, always leaping forward and never backward. And first of all, like, really? Frogs can't leap backwards? And so I'm going to save you 30 seconds out of your life by Googling that, but it actually checks out. Frogs can't jump backwards based on what I've seen. So still a really weird name. But what exactly does JFROG do? Like, what's their business model? And so this diagram is actually pretty helpful, and I think it's easier to understand their value proposition by understanding the history of mobile updates. So you can see in like the late 90s, like someone had a broken mobile phone and you go to a phone repair shop and you're like, hey, I need to have this fixed. And then in the mid 20s, if you needed to have your mobile phone updated, or your computer updated, it's this long, the death spiral, updating software. And you can see that over here. Then in the mid 2010s, it's like, hey, click on this button to update it or do it later. And it's like, do I really want to turn off my phone for the next decade, as this upgrade goes through? And then now you're in this where it's constantly, continually updating the software. And is that important? And The reason why this is important is the threats are constantly evolving. You don't want to have to wait for a patch to get manually installed. You going, oh, okay, yes, I approve this. In order to direct or detect a new threat, you can see here like, oh, invader detected. But here like, oh, there's a new invader. But because the patch hasn't been installed or there hasn't been a new software upgrade because maybe it was a manual process before, there are problems and software doesn't work the way it should because it's not being continuously updated. What else? And so another aspect is that the implication of failing to update is more severe now, more than ever, uh, because it's software has become so integrated in society. And the challenge is that we view it as an inconvenience or a waste of time when we're prompted with this, like, oh man, do I really want to have to shut off my phone? You can see like the risk of failed updates is so much higher in present day than it was in the past. And the importance of having something that they call liquid software, we're going to get into that in a second, is just so important, as it removes the risks of the software being compromised, and it also makes sure that the end users are getting the experience that is intended by the software providers, by the companies. Okay, so I'm sort of talking high level about the problem that JFrog's trying to solve. Like, I think I understand the problem they're addressing, which is like, hey, software updates should be continuous versus manual. But what are they actually trying to do to solve it? Like, what are they doing to solve this problem? And that's where we get to the core, the heart of their business, at what is JFrog, which is Artifactory. And I'm going to read this quote below, where the first universal package repository. It allows teams and organizations to store, update, and manage their software packages at any scale. Ensures that all software packages being deployed are the most current by automatically caching dependencies between packages and package versions, including from external sources. What? Like, what did I just say? There's a lot going on there. So take a step back. What they're trying to do is, you should understand, how is software released? And the reality is there's a whole cycle revolving software where you're monitoring what's going on with the software, and then you see how people are using it. So you start planning, we need to roll out these new features, and you have your software programmers, they start coding out these new features, but you need to integrate it with the existing app, so you build it in, and then you start layering in, let's test it out, make sure there's no bugs. Then you release it and you start deploying it. Oh, let's just deploy it to these users, and then you start expanding it, you operate it across your whole user base, and then once again you're going through this cycle again, operating, seeing how it's being used. And you can't just code new software. You can't just code it and then jump to deploy it. That's the problem, is that there's a whole orchestration process of changing code, updating it, and making sure it's ready to be rolled out across your whole customer base. And so why is JFrog Artifactory important? And this serves as a single source of truth for an entire organization's software packages, and it ensures consistency and enabling trust and automation in the software release cycle. So just think about the importance of consistency with software. Like, if you run a company, do you really want dozens of different iterations floating around based on your device or based on your operating system or based on geography? Of course not. You want a seamless experience across all your users, and you don't want different versions that are outdated being run. And when they're talking about single source of truth, that means that programmers across the company can say, hey, this is the software we need to use as we roll out this company. Or as we roll out this new software. These are the packages that go into this software, and there's a single source of truth of what is the latest packages that we're going to be including in our software. So the way to think about it is the packages are part of this much broader piece of the whole software pie. And when you hear something like single source of truth for a company, the alarm bells for unrivaled value proposition should start going off. It means you're providing something that's really important to your underlying customers. because if you have a single source of truth for these customers that are rolling out software, they're saying, hey, we know that this repository that's actively checking out the different iterations of this software and getting it so that it all combines and the correct versions are all working together. By saying, hey, this is a single source of truth, that's incredibly important. You don't want random packages that are wrong or have flaws or have backdoors in them to start getting rolled out. You want something that's seamless, that everyone in the organization can quickly see this is what's being used. So when I hear single source of truth, I'm thinking, wow, this is potentially something that's very important. And let's look at a real example. And so, they talk about Box, which is a customer, which provides cloud content management for organizations. Think about it like their competitor Dropbox, where it's about accessing and sharing files anywhere on any device. That's the value proposition of Box. And they started using JFrog in 2015, and it revolutionized the time it took for them to roll out new software updates from 6 months to 3 days or less. And that's incredible if you think about it, because in this modern era, you need to have continual software updates. It's, let's put it out. We see a problem. Let's fix it. Let's move on. Versus, hey, we see a problem and maybe 6 months later, the customer, it's getting fixed for the customer. That just doesn't fly in an environment where software is so important. And so if you need to have constantly, and maybe you have software where there's a whole bunch of problems that need to get fixed, and you're fixing one package at one problem at a time, and it's updating this package and it's updating that package. How do you make sure it's all getting integrated successfully? That's what we're talking about with JFrog. And so when you hear that they're enabling these types of tech companies to go from rolling out new software every 6 months to less than 3 days, that means they are enabling the company to operate the way they need to in this modern environment. But the reality is, this is just the beginning. And Artifactory is just the front door. And so they have this really interesting, diagram you can see here. It kind of looks like an airport where you see the different packages going in, that's going into the JFrog Artifactory, and JFrog's like integrating all these packages, coordinating like, hey, this is the version that we're using in the software. There's actually a lot more going on here. You see JFrog X-Ray, JFrog Distribution, Artifactory Edge, Insights, Mission Control, Access, Pipelines. Like, what's going on here? And what's interesting is, they spell it out here a little bit more, is they're expanding into all of the critical aspects of rolling out new software updates. So if you want to understand JFrog, I think on a high level basis, they are enabling rolling out new software updates in a seamless way for software companies. And the reality is, many companies use software nowadays. Almost, you can no longer just say, hey, tech companies. Almost all companies are being enabled by tech. And so if you're being enabled by tech, you probably have software that you need to update continuously. That's what JFrog's enabling. JFrog is enabling continuous software updating. And so it starts with, hey, here's the code. Let's store and manage all these different types of code. And keep in mind, programmers are working with all these different development platforms. JFrog Artifactory helps take the data from these different platforms, incorporates it all in this repository that they have. And then there's all these additional tools that they have, like X-Ray, where they're analyzing the packages for security and compliance. Like, hey, this new package that you're trying to incorporate in your core software, it actually has this security problem that's going to enable Russian hackers to break in. That would be a big problem for you. Or distribution of like, hey, let's help you coordinate how you're rolling out this software to potentially a global user base. Let's say you're Google and you have 1 billion plus users across 7 different products. They're going to enable you to roll it out, like, hey, to what geography, to what devices. And mission control, let's control and monitor the flow of these package updates. So you have these changes, like, how are we going to implement these changes? How are we, when and where, how are we going to make sure that there's a continuous updating process? And when you see all these things and you think about this from the importance of rolling out new software, it's not surprising to see that 85% of their revenue is from multi-product subscriptions, i.e. you start with JFROG Artifactory, which is storing and managing all these different types of software data, all these different types of packages. And then customers realize like, hey, this is just the start. This is JFrog's foot in the door. And customers realize we need all these other things. At the very least, we need to start with like X-ray. Like, let's make sure we're not increasing vulnerabilities in our business. So we start with X-ray. Then we think, oh, well, we need to figure out how we're going to roll this out. You start considering mission control or distribution. So when you start thinking like, oh, you have all these different pieces, that's another clue when I start thinking about unrivaled value proposition. Like, are you offering something that's integral, that's critical to the company that's using it? And that's why the founders call it, when you're looking at this whole thing, that's why the founders call it liquid software. And they say, this is our collective liquid software vision to power all software releases continuously and seamlessly across the globe. And what's interesting is, so here's actually a book where it says two of the founders are even writing a book about the movement of liquid software. And when I think of founders writing a book about a mission to create liquid software, I'm thinking you are a missionary. You are thinking about this as this is a major problem that's affecting things and companies around the world, companies, nations, people around the world, billions of people around the world being impacted by software updates. And so they're thinking about this like, hey, are these a bunch of mercenaries that are in it for the money, or are they folks that are treating this like a mission? And when I think that they're writing this book and they're talking about the liquid software vision, I'm thinking these are missionaries. So this is starting to get me excited. Like, hey, could I partner with these missionaries? Like, who's going to work harder in life, a missionary or a mercenary? If they're tackling the same problem, I think the missionary is going to work harder on the problem because that's their mission in life. That's why they get up in the morning. So what's the business model with JFrog? And it starts off with Artifactory, as I mentioned earlier, where they put their foot in the door, and then they upsell based on additional features like X-ray, based on the amount of data processed, based on the cache data. And it's a freemium model. The freemium model is critical because it helps build a following in the developer world. And at the end of the day, it's the developers throughout the world that are the ones that are building this and rolling this out. So, hey, you want a tool that makes it easier, that makes developers more happy to access this and start playing around with it, start tinkering with it. And you can see they have free, Pro Team, Enterprise, Enterprise Plus. And it's interesting how they always talk about unlimited number of users. And you can see the detailed pricing here. And the reason why it's unlimited number of users is because it's not based on the number of users that's important. It's based on the amount of data that's being transferred and the amount of time that they're spending, that their software spending, integrating and delivering code from different contributors. So if anything, they're eager to get more and more people using it. That's why it's unlimited number of users to use their software, because that just increases what they are using as sort of the hurdles, which is the data transfer, as well as how many minutes it takes to integrate the different codes into their system, saying, hey, you're getting all these different code, all these different packages. Let's make sure it's going seamlessly. It's all working correctly. So it effectively become forced, the larger you become, you effectively become forced to use JFrog if you're successful, because it's about the gigabits of data transferred per month and the minutes of integrating and delivering code from different contributors. And you can see how the pricing scales up pretty quickly, from zero, because once again, it's like, get your foot through the door, make sure that the software developers and are using it. And if it's free, they're more welcome to start playing around with it. Then it's $100 a month, $700 a month. And you can imagine it just gets more and more expensive. Okay, so what did their financials look like? And, their financials are very nice. You could see fast growth, year-to-date 2020, over 50% growth. They have very attractive gross margins, over 80%. This is the typical, SaaS business, that you see nowadays. Software, a B2B business. It's helping software as a service for businesses, business to business. 80% gross margins is super healthy, super attractive. That would imply that you could pass through really high operating margins in the future. And once again, they're incredibly capital efficient. You can see that their operating losses are pretty minimal in the first half of 2020. Even in 2019, it was pretty minimal. So they haven't really needed to raise money. It hasn't been significant. And so does, we can talk about their business model. We can talk about what they do. But in order to ensure that you win over time, you need to make sure you have an unrivaled value proposition. Does JFrog offer something that you can't get elsewhere? Because if you're unrivaled, it means you have the right to win. It means you have a right to dominate a market. And so does JFrog have that UVP? And so, first, how important are they? How important is JFrog relative to their end customers? Well, how important is software? For Bank of America, imagine if a software update doesn't work. Imagine you're United Technologies and you help make jet engines. Imagine if that doesn't work and you're running your aircraft and you're not getting the software updates. Oh yeah, when this light goes on, it means you need to check your jet engine. Or what if you're a payment company like Visa and literally there's a software update for vulnerability in the Visa payment network that maybe it doesn't get rolled out in time or it's not seamless. These are literally some of their customers, and they're impacting by enabling the continuous updating of software. They are literally touching the lives of billions of people, really critical companies, and I'd say nations. Even nations are at risk if JFrog starts failing. I mean, if you start having critical payment, if one of the top banks has a vulnerability that's caused because the software is not being updated in time, and all of a sudden you're seeing the code isn't working right, and maybe someone's account balances get all screwed up. That is huge. If you have a bank that's not able to open up one morning, and it's a major deposit base of a given country, that's a game changer. So I would say this is super duper important. On a scale of 1 to 10, this is potentially an 11. And these are just a few of their customers. They have 5,800 plus customers in the Fortune 500, 10 of the top 10 tech firms. 10 of the top 10. So this is important. If the top tech firms are vetting it, you can say yeah, this is legit. 8 of the top 10 financial service companies. 9 of the top 10 retail companies, 7 of the top 9 telecom companies. They are crushing it. And I would say these logos suggest that they are vetting it, and this is something that is critical. If Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet, Facebook, each of these, are touching hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, I would say making sure the software being updated in real time or in days or hours is so important. The continuous update of software isn't a nice to have. In today's environment, it's a need to have. And as a result, JFrog, you see some pretty interesting financial metrics. I talked at the beginning, you see some financial metrics that just top 1%. Their gross dollar revenue retention, this is gross dollar. So you take your existing customer base, don't even look at if they expand. And at the end of the year, based on giving 100% credit to who's churned out, you have 98% of your customers. So that implies 2% revenue churn in any given year. That's very sticky, incredibly sticky. But a net dollar retention, so factoring in that same customer base, are they expanding over time? Yeah, their net dollar revenue retention is over 130%. So when you factor in the customers that churn, just look at your existing customer base, start of the year. By the end of the year, assuming no new customers, you have 130% net revenue retention. That means you're going to grow by 30% that year. No new customers. That's just taking your existing customers and saying, hey, you're using JFROG Artifactory. Maybe you want to use some of these other critical elements like X-ray or the pipeline. These are some mind-blowing metrics. These are incredible financial metrics, but are they truly unrivaled? And the answer is that there are a handful, a few companies that are trying to compete with them on certain of their product offerings. You see Red Hat, you see GitLab, you see GitHub, Sonatype. Several of these companies are private. So it's tough to size up like what's their respective growth rates, what's the market share. But the question in my mind is whether their major customers would want to even switch on something that's so critical. And when I see something like that 130% net revenue retention, and I see the 2% churn, like I'm just blown away by this. So I'm starting to think like, yes, you probably have a value or super strong value proposition. And here's another clue. To date, we have not deployed a significant outbound sales force, relying primarily on our self-service and inbound sales model. Recently, we have begun building a small, high-touch strategic sales team to identify new use cases and drive expansion and standardization on JFrog within our largest customers. Why is this so important? What about this is critical? And I'm going to repeat the core part. We have not deployed a significant outbound sales force. They're relying on self-service and inbound sales model, i.e., they don't sell. Customers come to them to buy. That's so important. That's how important they are. They're so important that Amazon's coming to them and be like, yeah, we need this in order to continue operating properly. Bank of America, we're coming to you, JFrog. When Bank of America and Jeff Bezos are coming to JFrog and saying, hey, we need you. Can you sell us this thing? You're important in my mind. Like when I hear that, I'm like, wow, you must have a super duper strong value proposition. Now look, in investing, you never have perfect information. It's kind of like poker in that way. You don't get to see everyone's hands. Like, for example, a lot of their competitors are private. You don't get to see all the detail. So you have to, as an investor, you have to rely on clues like this to size up, like, is this a winning investment? Like, does this have an unrivaled value proposition? Sometimes you just have to piece together the clues to figure it out. And so I'm talking about incredible companies that are coming to them to buy, incredible financial metrics, like incredibly low churn, 2%, 130% net revenue retention. So all these data points make me think, yeah, maybe you're not a monopoly, but it sure seems like you have a really strong value proposition. What does their market potential look like? Does this have the potential for big game, where you're making 10x, your money over time? Are they tapping into it? And you can't, unless valuation expands by 10x, as an investor, if you want to make 10x, you got to rely on fundamentals where the company grows by 10x. So what does their market potential look like? And it's huge, enormous. Management thinks the size of the continuous software release market is $22 billion. And to put this in context, this is against $22 billion versus $120 million in revenue. So many, many, many multiples of their current size, even if they share this market with some of those competitors. And to gut check this, does this make sense? Can I agree with this? Think of all the sensors. This from their letter. Think of all the sensors, automobiles, manufacturing equipment, smart devices, and more that are part of the growing ecosystem of how software is consumed. When you think about the fact that software is getting ingrained in more and more and more things, jet engines have software that's being relayed to the folks on the ground and the aircraft, pilots and the aircraft manufacturers and the servicers. Like when you think about all these components, the Internet of Things, where it's all about software, being rolled out, these sensors being rolled out in anything. When you think about how software is just going to touch everything, how critical is it that that software is being continuously updated? So when I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking of Internet of Things touching, potentially everything over time, literally everything. I think this $22 billion potential, they could even be lowballing it, relative to what this market could be over time, just given, how dramatic it is going to be, how dramatic software is relative to everything else in the world, and making sure that your software is running seamlessly and you have the latest iteration on your software. So what's my conclusion? What's my personal take on JFrog? Am I buying this? Is this a great opportunity? And that's where you have to go to unrivaledinvesting.com, click on Journey to see, what do I buy? What do I sell? What do I hold? And this is an example of the exclusive content that I'm trying to create for my Journey subscribers, where I have things like this. I have an educational series, and I aim to identify at least one potential multi-bagger each month for my Journey subscribers. Now, it may be a multi-bagger where it's like, hey, I think this is expensive and the valuation, is a little bit rich for me. Maybe I'm not personally buying it, but here's why I think it could be a multi-bagger. But that's just me identifying the multi-baggers. You can track to see what I'm doing each month. So like the multi-baggers that I am excited about, you can see that. Plus, just like companies like JFrog, I'm going to be handing the tools, the investment calculators that you usually see, that I'm going to save for my Journey subscribers. And as I mentioned before, finding just one multi-bagger can change your personal life journey. So if you're interested in following my journey to find these multi-baggers, go to unrivaledinvesting.com, click on Journey. And most recently, one of my most recent videos was about a security where I called out that I think it could potentially have 10x potential in the next 5 years, and I detailed why. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe. If you're already a subscriber, I really appreciate the like. Thank you so much for watching.